Crackheads. One of them is your dad. Anyways, let's grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary horror stories that happen with these people, man. Attacked by a knife-wielding crackhead when I was 17. So this occurred mid-January 2017. It was around 10 p.m. and my dad and I were taking the dog for a walk around the block. As we were crossing the road, a girl in her late teens or early 20s came running towards us, screaming something about how he's beating her up. She led us into a small nearby terrace. As we entered the living room, someone threw a ceramic cup in our direction, which smashed on the wall right next to our heads. Here was a shirtless Aboriginal guy, also late teens, early 20s, pacing around in an agitated manner. He appeared to be drunk or high. There was another girl in the kitchen holding a baby, and she was screaming something at the guy. The first girl told us that he's on meth. We attempted to de-escalate the situation as my dad spoke to the girls to get a better idea of what was going on, and I followed the guy outside where I asked him some questions because he gave no real ones. I seemed to have a lapse of memory at this point because all I remember is the next thing we were on the footpath and he's lunging at my dad. They fought briefly and I tried to get him in the headlock, but he broke free and ran inside the house. One of the girls started screaming about how he was gonna get a knife, but at that moment he just emerged at the end of the hallway. He stood still for a moment. I saw he was holding a large kitchen knife. He quickly charged down the hall at us. As we began running away, I stopped like an idiot to pick up my metal water bottle I had left on the ground during the struggle. I can't explain exactly why I did that, but I figured it would be a weapon if he chased us, like to throw at him or use as a club or something. I was in such a hurry as I picked it up, I slipped and fell onto the pavement. My dad was a bit further up the street by now, not having initially seen my fall. The guy came out of the gate as I stood up, and we wrestled briefly. I tried to force his wrist back since, for all I know, he was still holding the knife. My dad ran back and hit him with a plastic garden chair, bringing him down onto the front path. We held him down, yelling for the girls to call the police. I picked up the knife, which he had dropped at some point, and threw it as far as I could up the street. The guy tried to fool us by closing his eyes and pretending to snore, hoping that we would loosen our grip on him. Whenever I think about the incident, even though we could have both been stabbed, remembering him doing that always makes me laugh. Another odd detail, some guy walked past and offered to tie him up with some cable ties, but we said no. We tried to keep him down until the police arrived. We heard police sirens and ran into the street. About 5 cops rushed into the house and armed with pepper spray. Shortly came up with a guy in cuffs. He was arrested. 4 months later, I found out that the guy stabbed someone in the neck in the exact same location and is now in jail. It's disturbing to think that he wasn't bluffing when he charged us with that knife, and that something like this could happen so close to home. Alone with a psychotic crackhead, gin, smokable stimulants, and sleep deprivation, the perfect ingredients in a recipe for disaster. Especially when the pot they're brewing is in a mentally ill squatter that likes to wave around his big sticks when he's mad. The man described as Daryl, my dad's old high school buddy, the 40-something-year-old antagonist of one of my life's more traumatic events, which took place back in 2015. It was a warm, fragrant springtime afternoon, and I was an 18-year-old kid coming home from a day of class at the local community college. Coming home to my dad's anarchist trap house that my friend and I decided to move into as roommates a year before. It was a small, one-story downtown house in an upscale neighborhood, as it had a 5 to 7 vagabond guests or couch surfers at any given time. There's up to 10 people under one roof, or 2 if you count the shed. Conflict was always going to happen. I entered it through the side gate, from the well-manicured street-facing front and the neglected, junk-filled back. There he was, sitting at his crooked, worn-out metal table, placed right next to my path to the bent-up screen door. Daryl was dressed in his finest filthy brown hobo jacket as he carved his latest piece of stick art. He looked up at me with glazed eyes and an absent expression. This struck me as odd, since although he was weird, he wasn't usually this weird. When I looked closer at his table, I saw why. Along with his usual random pieces of metal and rocks he used for his wands, there was a blackened glass tube, a lighter, and 4/5 empty gallon jug of rot gut gin, the gin I had watched him bring home with him the night before. The night before, he had been partying, having fun, and acting fairly normal, but the presence of the charred, straight-shot glass pipe on the table explained how he had stayed awake this whole time. The contents of his pipe, which were soaked into a screen made from the strands of copper wire vampire scrubber can probably be deduced logically. Hint, it rhymes with smack Spokane. I gave Daryl a modest greeting, to which he responded with an awkward head movement and unfriendly grunt as he continued to aggressively carve a stick. His body language gave me a dark vibe, full of animosity. What I experienced while walking in was unusual, but nothing too crazy for me. I had seen worse in that house, and had such a chip on my shoulder, I was almost itching for some kind of altercation to take my anger out on a daily basis. If this was my opportunity to protect my territory, I would do it with pleasure. I was a massive stoner and a bit of an alcoholic at the time, and upon arriving home, I usually would have stopped at my friend's room to say hi and smoke a bowl or two, but he was at his mom's house that night, which meant that, unfortunately, he was not able to witness the events that would be taking place over the following couple of hours. Although I had substance issues, I was still an honor roll student, so instead of smoking a bowl, I went straight back to my room to get some economics homework done. I worked for about 45 minutes before focusing became impossible due to loud noises and yelling coming from the kitchen area, which was just beyond the hallway entrance, mere feet away from my bedroom door. This was simply not something I would tolerate, so I grabbed my 2009 digital camera and made my way to the heart of the commotion. Holding my camera, I entered the kitchen to find my dad and his two tough biker friends huddled together near the sink. Daryl had more or less cornered them. His arms were outstretched, making his hobo jacket appear like brown wings as he held up his largest stick in one hand. When I walked in, I said nothing to alert him to my presence. I simply held up the camera to record him as he verbally spilled his darkest demons on all of us. He was belligerently screaming at my dad and his friends, but his biggest target was Joe, our lovable old biker dude, who had been my dad's friend his whole life, and who never treated Daryl with anything but friendliness and respect. Daryl was screaming about how he was a racist, while Joe continued to deny it, raising his voice to match. While I can't speak for Joe's personal beliefs, I will emphasize that Daryl did not face any sort of discrimination under our roof. He may have felt disrespected at times, but his behavior was often unacceptable, and any confrontation was well deserved. During one of his loud, drunken, barely coherent rants, Daryl had begun hitting all the wooden cabinets with a stick, pairing his screaming with the crazed rhythms of a wild man. I continued to hold the camera out towards him, making no attempt to hide it or leave the room, all while he creeped his way towards me, whacking each cabinet along the way. You may see me as naive and crazy to do this, but I was filled with excitement. My desire to record him was mainly for evidence. He turned his head to face mine at an unnatural speed, his face squinched into a scowl as he laid eyes on me and my camera. With his rot gut gin breath, he got up in my face, waving his stick around in his hand as if to threaten me. "Get that camera out my fucking face, boy!" he slurred. I cursed back at him in defiance and held firm as he tried to grab it from me. We wrestled back and forth for my green digital camera for about 10 seconds as I continued to record. Fortunately, I was able to get it back, and as I did, he moved to get close and intimidate me again, more aggressively now. Even though he was 10 inches taller than me, 18-year-old me had a tendency to be numb to situations like this, and my fear response had lessened with time. Having spent the previous 3 years self-harming and on edge of unliving myself, I had already embraced death. This wasn't the only time I put myself in a dangerous situation that year, hoping for violence. I was also extremely territorial and protective of my family and people I cared for, and being extremely insecure, I was very sensitive to any perceived disrespect to myself or the house. As he towered over me, my right hand rested around the closed lid of an empty cookie jar sitting on the kitchen table. At that moment, I knew if he got out of hand, that jar would be my last resort. I loosened my grip on the jar, pushed Daryl away, and watched him move back from me and make his way back to torment my dad and his friends again. I took this opportunity to put my camera back in my room, and came out a minute later to find that my dad and his biker dudes had gone to my dad's back room. Daryl had gone back to his dirty mattress in the dark shadows of the living room in the front of the house. Things had gone lulled, and I still had homework to do, so I went back inside my room. After about a half hour, darkness had fallen outside, and things were too quiet. Something had to be wrong. I wanted to check out on my dad and his friends, so I left my room and found myself in an eerie, grimy kitchen with the lights on and the dark windows facing the night. There was soft mumbling to my left. Daryl was kneeling in the dim rays of light, cast from the kitchen to the contrasting darkness of the living room. He was holding 2 billiard balls he had taken from the pool table, one in each upward-facing hand and outstretched arms. His eyes, his head, rolled back to face the ceiling, in a perfect position to channel demons like an antenna. Like his head, his eyes were rolled back, with only the bloodshot whites being visible. As his head gently jerked around with a satanic mumbling, the dim light reflected off his bald scalp, shaven smooth with a big razor. His unkempt salt and pepper goatee was specked with foamy dribble. Seconds after I saw him, he jolted up into life like an animated corpse, his face contorted into hatred I hadn't seen before or since, as he launched towards me from his kneeled position, still holding the pool balls in each hand. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the cookie jar and, with Daryl close on my tail, retreated to my dad's room. Fortunately, the lights were on here as well, and the room had a door connecting to the backyard. He caught up to me in there, so I pushed him back into a ragged of a wooden table in the corner, which broke under his weight. He quickly recovered and sneered back at me as we bolted up from the wreckage. As he did so, I stumbled out the back door, tripped backward down the 2 concrete steps, and landed on the cement patio bordering the grass. Time had condensed in that moment, as all of this occurred in just a few seconds. When I landed, the cookie jar in my right hand had broken, and I was bleeding heavily from a large gash on my palm caused by the broken porcelain, but there was no pain. I wound up my pitching arm from my position on the ground, and as he was about to make his way through the back door, I launched the jagged remnants of the cookie jar through the air. Lucky strike, the cookie jar crashed through the glass window in the back door and hit Daryl squarely on the forehead. He went limp and collapsed onto the floor of my dad's room. He did not get up. It was his turn to bleed. Having faced the entire situation alone, I made my way to the shed to find my dad, his 60-year-old biker friend Joe, and Joe's other biker friend. I opened the shed door, and there they were, all sitting in a close circle, whispering to each other. Tough men, cowering in this tiny one-room living space in the corner of the yard. 3 grown men left 18-year-old me alone to fend for myself in a house with a violent psychopath, but I forgave them. They genuinely seemed terrified, and I was thanked profusely by all of them for solving their problems. I appreciated the ego boost, but we still had 2 problems. I was bleeding heavily, and Daryl was unconscious and bleeding twice as much as I was. I was advised to wrap my wounds, get in my car, and drive the 25 minutes to my grandma's house in the woods. I bled in my car all the way to grandma's house. When I was there, I soaked my wounds in soapy water, hoping to avoid getting stitches, since I still didn't know if I was considered a criminal or not, and wanted to lie low. About 20 minutes into soaking, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I had a feeling it was related to the event that had just taken place, and I was correct. It was a deputy from the sheriff's department at the scene of the crime. I was quaking, but explained to her exactly what happened in complete honesty. Her response filled me with lightness like a helium balloon. It was self-defense, she had said, and Daryl was obviously blacked out and having a psychotic episode. According to the police, Daryl was found lying in a pool of blood on the front porch area. A neighbor had called the police, and when they arrived, Daryl had woken up and began to attack them, screaming about racism. Apparently, he believed the police were racist and there to harass him. He believed he was becoming a victim of racist police brutality and decided to attack the police before they attacked him. He attacked a female police officer too. Not cool. After learning that, I got back inside the car to drive myself to the emergency room and continued to make a bloody mess for the whole 25-minute drive there. That night, I stayed over at my grandma's house. When I went back to my dad's house the next day, I learned a few details from my dad about what happened after I left. Daryl Daryl had bled so much that my dad and his friends were unable to absorb it faster than it was coming out, even after using all the towels inside of the house. It was at that point that they dragged him onto the front porch. They wanted to be done with him and let society deal with it. Daryl got treated at the hospital himself that night and spent the next 2 weeks in jail for disorderly conduct. I'm happy to say that he never came back to our house, and I never saw him again. In a sense, my dad and his friends were right. I did solve a problem. The guy was a squatter and a menace, and now he was gone. Best part, he was so messed up on drugs, he could hardly remember what happened. He thought it was Joe the biker who hit him. He has no memory of fighting with me. Now, 7 years later, this event is still standing out to me as a story in my life. I learned a lot from spending a year living in an anarchist trap house, but the biggest thing I learned is to stand up for yourself and your territory, even when it makes people not like you, and to always watch out for tweakers when they drink cheap gin. Chased by 2 separate crackheads in the same week. This is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. So it first happened earlier this week on, I believe, Tuesday, when my boyfriend and I drove to Racetrack to get cereal. Weird, I know. Target and Walmart closed early because of Corona, and we knew Racetrack had mini cups. So we drove to the nearest racetrack. We were not in our neighborhood, but rather visiting my sister and helping her move in the city next to ours. It was no later than midnight. We got to the racetrack 5 minutes away, and we were going to park on the side of the gas station. Then I told my boyfriend to park in the front because I wanted to wait in the car and didn't want to sit in the not well-lit area. I wanted to wait in front just in case to be safe where it was well-lit. I'm weird about that, I know. So we're driving to the front, and this tall, young black woman walks straight to her car and looks us dead in the eyes, puts her hand on the hood of the car, and signals us to come on with her hands. Then she flips us off and walks back to her car. We felt super weird about that, and soon sees that her car was on the other side of the gas station. Why did she come over to us like that? We decided no more cereal and get back on the road and take the long way just in case. In that short time, she got back into her car and was in front of us already because she got directly on the road from the gas station entrance. She's in front of us, sees our car, gets into the next lane and reverses and tries to look at us directly. My boyfriend gets into the lane over and gets onto the service road, and she follows us. She got super close to us on both sides and would not move. She was racing us and would brake to get closer to us. We hit the brakes at one point when she was going super fast to see if she would get away. She hit the brakes too when she was a couple 100 feet away and reversed back onto us. She almost ran us into the ditch by the highway on the service road 3 to 4 times. We finally speed up and got onto the highway, and she missed the entrance. Fast forward to tonight on Thursday in our hometown, when I was dropping off my boyfriend at his house around 9-ish. I stopped in front and we talked for a couple minutes before he had to go back inside. We saw a car up front driving towards us with headlights on, and I assumed that it was just a cop or something like that. We were sitting there talking. I didn't think any of it because we weren't doing anything wrong. The car slowly creeps up next to us, and we see it's not a cop car at all. It stops at the stop sign behind us once it's past us and makes a U-turn and gets directly behind us. My boyfriend tells me to drive immediately. I start driving, and I accidentally pressed my trunk opener and it flew open. I could not see behind me, but it eventually closed with the wind. Luckily, my boyfriend's brother lived not too far away, and we booked it there. I ran 2 stop signs getting there because if I wouldn't have, the car behind us would get to us. We get to his brother's house after not even 3 minutes, and this older white male with long hair gets out of his car and immediately starts yelling to us, saying we're human trafficking and putting people in danger by running the stop signs. My boyfriend tried to calm him down, and the guy says he got my license plate and gets in his car and just drives away. We called the police that time and filed a report. I was crying and couldn't even think about calling the police in the moment because it was so fast and I couldn't function really. We were so shaken up by this, and it's so strange that it's happened to both of us together this week. What does this mean? Is this just a sign that I shouldn't be driving? Do I need to get my life together? Or is this just bad luck and Simon? I'm sorry if this doesn't all make sense. I'm still scared and can't gather all of my thoughts. Both of these individuals looked not all there and were acting totally on impulse and, sporadically, I guess. They were definitely on drugs or crack or something. Alcohol, maybe even. I don't know. Anyways, this is just crazy.